Hello, I am Tytti Solantaus. I'm a child psychiatrist from Finland. The EU Commission has started a project called Let's Talk About Children in Europe. And it is a project which the aims are to help families who have problems, who live in hard situations.
Hello, my name is Ian Mannion. I'm a child and youth psychologist from Canada. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to share with you a little bit about my own experiences. I happen to be someone who wears a lot of different hats. I am a clinician trained to work with children, youth, and families. I'm also a researcher. I've done lots of research in mental health with a focus on family mental health, but also depression, suicide in young people. I'm a policy advisor. I talk to governments to help them know what we know so we can make better use of research, better use of practical knowledge from all of those that are working with children, youth, and families, particularly as it pertains to mental health. I'm also a person with lived experience. I'm someone that has suffered from recurring depression and anxiety most of my life. And it's a challenge sometimes being a professional who also happens to be someone that has some lived experience. My lived experience extends beyond myself. I am the son of my mother is a person with depression, lifelong depression. I'm also the parent of a daughter that has had recurring issues with severe anxiety and depression, mental health concerns, which include hospitalization. And I'm the parent of another daughter who has a developmental disability, which is a different kind of problem. And I think there's some interesting parallels to be brought between the two. Well, perhaps it's worthwhile to explain a little bit how I became aware of my own mental health issues.
Mhm.
And the stigma that's attached to that affects our behavior as individuals, but perhaps more importantly at this stage as professionals.
Mhm.
Stigma is huge when we're talking about mental health. It interferes with people's willingness to go and talk about having a problem, to going and accessing help, to discussing it with employers.
Mhm.
And as professionals, I think we have a significant role in helping to reduce stigma.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, sometimes we can increase stigma
Yes.
by how we are willing to talk about things or not talk about things.
Mhm.
And there's nothing worse than creating a situation with those that we are trying to serve that it somehow makes it more difficult for them to be willing to benefit from that service and to benefit from experience that we might have working with other families or even in our professional training. So when I think back, I can't remember a time where I didn't feel different from peers. And this was not something, at least in my household, that we ever talked about.
Mhm.
Mental health was not on our radar.
Mhm.
And this is in spite of the fact that over time I learned that many people in my extended family suffered from mental illness, primarily depression. So from a young age, very young age, I felt different. But I remember as young as 6, 7, or 8, being overwhelmed with anxiety at times. And even I remember hiding in a closet because I was overwhelmed by other people being in the home and just not wanting to be there anymore. Wondering if I held my breath long enough, would I actually be able to go away and all my problems would go away. But of course, this was not something that I ever discussed with my parents or my friends or my teachers or my doctors.
Did I ask you something?
Absolutely.
Did you, at that time, did you realize that this was something, wanting to end your breathing and disappear, that this was something that other children would not have? Or do you think that it was just part of life?
No, actually, I thought that I was probably the only person in the world that felt this way,
Okay.
which made me strange, which made me different,
Yes.
which embarrassed me.
Mm-hmm.
I felt some shame, some guilt, didn't understand it. It was overwhelming. Imagine a young child who had these huge feelings and no
Mhm.
ability to turn down the volume, to
Mhm.
turn
Mhm.
down
Mhm. Mhm.
that feeling overwhelmed.
Mhm. Mhm.
I remember as a child in school, teachers commenting to my parents that Ian is a very smart child, but very, very sensitive. And
Mm.
that was almost a criticism. It was like,
Mm.
oh,
Mhm.
he's a good
Mhm.
student, but he has
Yes.
this emotional thing you have to
Yes.
watch out for.
Yes.
And my parents wouldn't talk much
Yeah.
about it. So I knew there was always something different, but I never
Yeah.
discussed it with
Yeah.
anyone.
Well, now that later on, have you thought about why you did not talk and why your parents did not
Well,
talk about theirs?
that's a very good question. When I was older, a little bit
Mhm.
older,
Mhm.
probably I'm thinking 13,
Mhm.
I remember my parents taking me aside and telling me that they needed to talk to me about something.
Mhm.
And they said, I'm the, there are 4 children in my family. I have an older
Mhm.
sister and 2
Mhm.
younger brothers. And they said, we need to talk to you about your sister.
Mm.
And I said, oh. And they said, you might notice that she's a little bit
Mhm.
different, that
Mhm.
sometimes she kind of stares off into space. That's because she has something called epilepsy.
Mm.
And I said, oh, I don't know what that is. And they said,
Mhm.
well, there's something wrong with her brain. Now, we didn't tell you sooner because we wanted to wait till your grandparents had passed away, because they never would have been able to accept the fact that one of their
Yes.
grandchildren had something wrong with their brain. But now that
Mm.
they're not here anymore, we thought that you should know,
Mhm.
because you notice things. But
Yeah.
please don't tell anybody outside the family. So
Yeah.
from a very young age, I was taught sometimes families are a little bit different, but
Yeah.
that's our own internal secret. We don't share that with other people.
Yes.
And maybe
Yes.
if your sister seems a little strange, it's
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's something wrong with her brain. So you
Mhm.
need to know that. So I was kind of trained not to talk about
Yeah.
differences, not to
Yes.
talk about
Yes.
things that others might not be able to understand, especially if it was mysterious, like something inside the brain.
Yeah.
See, I think that
Yeah.
families have secrets, families have
Mm.
traditions,
Yeah.
have ways of talking about certain things and not touching other things.
Mm. Mhm.
So no, I definitely agree with you. But I also agree that often children and adolescents worry about their
Oh,
parents.
yes.
We saw
Mhm.
this particularly during COVID.
Yes. Yeah.
When you asked
Mhm.
young people what they were most concerned
Yeah.
about,
Mhm.
more often than not, they talked about parents and grandparents than
Oh, yes.
themselves.
Yes.
They felt
Mhm.
more invulnerable,
Yeah.
and were more concerned about their
Yeah.
parents.
Mhm.
In my case, in terms of how different I felt, I don't think I
Mhm.
was protecting my parents. I think I was
Yeah. Yeah.
protecting myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't want them to
Mhm.
know that I felt as different that I did. I didn't want
Mhm.
them to feel
Yeah.
maybe ashamed of me in
Mm.
some
Mhm.
way. So that stayed quiet for the longest time.
Mm.
During adolescence,
Mhm.
when I was particularly ill, I would say I
Yes.
was
Yes.
particularly ill, to the point where I did uh, have an attempt that I had made
Mm.
on my own
Mhm.
life. I knew that at that point that was I can't do that because I have to protect my parents. I
Mm.
couldn't do
Mhm.
that to my
Yeah.
parents. That became something
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. Of course.
But I
Yeah.
still didn't
Mhm.
understand what was
Mhm.
going on with me and didn't feel that
Yes.
I could discuss it
Yes.
with my
Yes.
parents.